Interesting, my camera is not pointing in the right direction. What's going on there? Good afternoon, everybody. Let me just fix that. That's weird. Press the right button, Drew. I think it's this one. There we go. I'm going to slide myself smoothly across. I'm not sure what that was all about, but anyway, it's now central. There we go. Anyway, hello everybody. It's Saturday afternoon. It is retro gaming time, which is awesome. I like my retro gaming almost as much as I like the modern stuff. Some things it's purer, it's simpler and stuff. There we go. Who's on this line? We've got Commander JR1988. Kelly Baglar is here as well. Commander Sinclair. Beetlejude. Oh, hello, my dear. Good to see you. Thank you very much for popping along. Love the use of the hat. Very good. Commander Ariok is here as well. Fantastic. That's good. Mintopio is here. Awesome. We've got the crew. Fantastic. Right now, today, yes, that was a smooth start to the stream. Smooth as glass. Right, so, what am I doing? Right, yes, Elite. Surprise, surprise. Now, this is going to be my last retro stream for a couple of weeks because of holidays, actually. Or possibly 3, I'm not quite sure, depending on how my holiday works out. So yes, I thought I'd finish it all up. We've done the Spectrum playthrough of Elite, which has been good. I've done all the missions. I've documented them. They're all on YouTube now, which is good. I'm very happy with that. That feels like we've finished a job. So I thought just to sort of finish it off, and before I get back into retro gaming after my holiday, it might be nice to compare. And Kelly Baglar and friends gave me some help in sorting out the Commodore 64 emulator. So I now have all 3, I suppose, original 8-bit platforms, because I put up a Twitter about a tweet about the original 8-bits, and of course I can't remember who it was, but somebody online showed me this massive collection of all the original Elites on all sorts of platforms. So there aren't original just 3, but these are I think I'm right in saying these are the first 3 Elites: ZX Spectrum, Commodore 64, and BBC, obviously. Not actually in that order. So BBC, Commodore 64, then the ZX Spectrum. So I think I'm right in saying that's the order they came out. Now, obviously Elite was ported to virtually everything that had a computer and a keyboard and a monitor back in the 80s. But I think these were the first 3. So, and these are the ones we all fought about when I was in the playground. So which was the best? Intense rivalry back in the day. So anyway, I've got them working. So with no further ado, let's go have a look at them. So here we go. Now up here, so just to let you know what I'm doing. Okay, so this is the Commodore. Wrong button. This is the Commodore 64 emulator, which is that's just crashed. Excellent. Oh, hang on, what's going on here? Why did that suddenly jump to full screen? That's a bit weird. Hang on, I'll shut it down. Yeah, the Commodore the Commodore 64 emulator has crashed. So yeah, well, that went well. That was it's all going well. The Commodore 64 crashed. The Spectrum took over the full screen. And I couldn't shut it down. Only the BBC is behaving itself, which is over here. All right, let me get the emulators back up and running again. I thought I'd had that all set up, and yeah, well, anyway, it kind of went wrong. Right, Commodore 64 is down here. Right, there we go. Okay, so come on, work this time, Commodore. There we go. Right, it seems to be up. Right, so there we go. We've got the Commodore 64 emulator called Vice, the BBC emulator, which is called Beep M. And the Spectrum emulator I'm using is called Spectaculator, which is why it's jumping into full screen. Why is it jumping into full screen? I don't want full screen. There we go. That's better. Right. So there we go. We've got all the emulators. Not quite sure why it's doing that. Apologies for that. So anyway, so I do have some snapshots ready because loading these things up is a pain, but they do work. So want to take you through the loading experience, okay? Because it's all part of the 8-bit charm. So let's start with the BBC first. And I've got a natty little. There we go. Look at this. I've got a natty little screen display just for each computer, just to make it fun. Commander Orange Phoenix. I remember finding the emulator of my phone for the Spectrum. Yeah, it's amazing what you can do, because of course the phones are immensely powerful nowadays. So right, anyway, so this is the BBC. So now for some reason the snapshot that I've got for the BBC, which is the one that Frontier gave out a few years ago, doesn't seem to work with the BBC in Model B mode, which it kind of should. So that's what it should look like. But if you load up Elite in this mode, it doesn't work, and I don't really know why. I don't know enough about the BBC to comment. It was always the posh kid's computer at school, as far as I was concerned. And I didn't use them very much. I remember coming across the BBC, obviously, but anyway, that's what the BBC looked at. Now, in order to get this emulation to work, we have to switch to the BBC Model B Plus, which seems to be a later variant with a board. Okay, and it's got more memory. I don't think that affects the game at all, but for some reason the emulator just doesn't work. Yeah, weird, but there we go. Kelly Bagler, I'm the only person who's managed to crash the 64 emulator. Yes, skills. Beetlejuice started on the Electron. Now, the Electron was the predecessor to the BBC, and the Atom was the one afterwards. Is that right? I get a bit confused with the BBC one. Right, so anyway, so this is what happens when you load the BBC. Now the emulator here does emulate the disk drive version, so that's what we're playing, the disk drive version of Elite. So here we go. Goes, look at this. Boom, boom. There it goes. It's loaded, yay! And I'm assuming that's relatively authentic. I mean, if you've used the BBC to load Elite on the disk, tell me if that's oh, it's the other way around. So the Atom first, then the BBC, then the Electron. Oh yeah, the Electron is the cheaper version of the BBC to compute with the Spectrum, wasn't it? That's right. Anyway, so that is the loading. Okay, so loading from floppy disk on the BBC was immensely quick. Okay, so that yeah, that's good. Oh, so the Atom was first. Atom, Proton, Electron. Right, okay. And the Proton is the code name for the BBC, isn't it? The BBC B in Model A and all that sort of stuff. Anyway, so there we go. That's the loading experience of the BBC version. Right, let's go to the Spectrum version, okay? So, and I've deliberately slowed down because the Spectrum, of course, did have microdrives, but at this era it didn't. It only had cassettes. So I'm going to subject you to the first minute the Spectrum loading mechanism. So here we go. Just delightful memories. Now, actually, the Spectrum's loader was actually quite quick for a tape interface. It was running about 1,200 characters per second, which isn't bad actually for a cassette. And here we can actually see it loading directly into the screen memory, which is part of the RAM of the Spectrum. And the Spectrum uses its unique way of doing graphics, high-res graphics but low-res colour, which gave the famous attribute clash. So there we go. It was at this point I'd go up and make myself a cuppa. Yeah, this was 4 minutes, okay, 4 minutes before the game would load. So this is what Spectrum users saw. And this actually, as you can see, I've got the wrong snapshot load. This is the 128K version, but they're pretty much the same. Okay, so that's all that's done so far is just load a loading screen. Hasn't actually loaded the game yet. Right, now it's 4 minutes. Okay, so I won't subject you to the rest of that because it's extremely boring. Let's just switch it to, there we go, I'm going to enable fast loading. Okay, so after 4 minutes of that, hopefully you get this, okay? Which you will be familiar with, okay? You know, because of been playing it for the last few months. But that's the Spectrum loading experience. Okay, so we've done that. That's the Spectrum. And now Commodore 64. Okay. So Commodore 64. Now the Commodore 64 looks like this. Now tell me actually, Commodore 64 owners. I always remember looking at the Commodore 64 in, kind of in WH Smiths and Boots and places like that that were selling computers at the time. And I'm always thinking, why are the colours so washed out? All the colours on the C64 seem to be very muted, very sort of shades of pastel rather than the bright colours that the other computers seem to be able to generate. So the BBC and the Spectrum were bright, sharp yellows, greens, etc., etc. But the Commodore 64 was always this sort of slightly off tone. And I don't know if that was because it was an American computer being plugged into British TVs or something like that. It's just one of those things that I just remember very distinctly being a thing on the Commodore 64, that the colours were this sort of lighter shades of pale sort of effect. I mean, it's quite relaxing, but it's very distinctive. So I don't know whether it can actually do bright colours. Okay, so but it was it just seems very soft and muted and something. I don't know, but it was mostly pastel. It's funny. Now I can show you part of the loading thing. Now for some reason, even the Commodore 64 and Kelly Baglar, bless him, helped me out with this. The Commodore 64 does have a disk drive version of Elite, which we're emulating here, but the disk drive. I'm not sure if this is genuinely true. I timed the ZX Spectrum loading of Elite, and it's 4 minutes and 12 seconds, okay? And that's on cassette. 4 minutes and 12 seconds on cassette to load Elite into the ZX Spectrum. The Commodore 64 disk emulation takes longer than that. And I'm like, why is the disk drive slower than the cassette? Is that a problem with the emulator? Because it's insanely slow on the emulator, and I don't know if that's an issue with the emulator or whether the Commodore 64 disk loading was really that slow. Commodore 64 owners, please defend the honour of the 64 at this point, because it just seems ludicrously bad. Anyway, so let me show you. The only reason I wanted to show, because it's got quite a cool loading screen. Okay, to be honest, my favourite loading screen out of all three of the games, because and this is a cracked version. I should hesitate to add. I can't get the official one to work, so this is a cracked version for the Commodore 64. And off it goes. Right, whoever the dynamic duo were, they cracked Elite back in the day. So you get this lovely loading screen. Okay, so this is taken from the box of the Dark Wheel. So I think the Commodore 64, to be honest, wins on loading screens because it has the best loading screen out of all of these games. It actually takes the box art from the game and tries to replicate it on the computer, which none of the other games did. I'm going to give the C64 some props for that, because that to me is rather nice. But see what I mean about the muted color scheme? It's nice, but it's, I suppose those are reds, but they look like someone's it's been out in the sun too long. And it's just faded away. The colours are pastely. Commodore 64 owners tell me, is this genuinely realistic for how slow the disk drive was on the C64? Because it's glacial, it really is. So I'm a bit surprised by that. Anyway, so there we go. So, but I do have a snapshot. So anyway, what you ended up with ultimately, after waiting for a long, long time, and I actually genuinely did go away and make a cup of tea with a C64 emulation, eventually it comes back. Now it does do, again, Commodore 64 owners do tell me, during the loading of this, the screen gets corrupted towards the end. Weird sort of stuff happens, and it looks like it's crashed before the game starts. And I restarted it a couple of times thinking something had gone wrong, but it seems to be the right behaviour. But ultimately you end up with this. So there we go. There's the Commodore 64 doing its thing. Okay. Kelly Bagloss says that's all normal. So actually it sort of corrupts the screen display as part of the loading, which is interesting. Again, the Commodore 64 was not a computer that I was very familiar with. It was just the other kids in the playground had Commodore 64s. I was a Specky man through and through. So I'm going to try and not be biased on this. Now I am going to need your help, okay, because I haven't been able to figure out all the keys because it's really difficult, and they differ between all the different versions. Now, I know the Spectrum keys partly through muscle memory, and partly through just sort of trying jabbing at things and figuring them out. So I'm working on the keys. But what I want to do with these three versions, so now I've got them all working. Okay, so that's Commodore 64, that's the ZX Spectrum, and this is the BBC Micro. Okay, so first impressions. Well, Commodore 64 I think gets a mark for the loading screen. I think they did a good job there. Doesn't get good marks for the loading time. BBC wins that one, but I think it's a bit of an unfair competition because the Spectrum, bless its little socks, doesn't have a disk drive, so it's stuck with a cassette. So it does all right, given that. But so first impressions. Well, both the Commodore 64 and the BBC are both programmed by David Braben and Ian Bell. Okay, so they're using 6502 style processors. I think the Commodore 64 isn't a 6502. It's a slightly different version, a 6510 or something. Somebody will know in the chat. And the BBC, now I'm going to try and get this right, the BBC is a 6502 running at 2 megahertz. Okay, now these numbers may seem very strange to modern ears, but that's the BBC is running at 2 megahertz. Okay, 2 megahertz. The Spectrum is running at 3.5 megahertz, but this version of Elite was not programmed by David Braben and Ian Bell. This was programmed by somebody else. And you can see the way it's been implemented is very, very different to the BBC version. The Commodore 64 is running a 6510 processor, and I think it's not even running at 1 megahertz, if I'm correct. It's 0.8 or 0.9, somebody will know. it's definitely not quite 1, I think. There we go, in power, 0.8 megahertz. Okay, so not even a megahertz, it's 800,000 hertz. And it's slightly faster in America. Okay, NTSC. Now that was important, the speed of the computer compared to the display back in the days. Because remember, we were plugging these computers into television sets, and by modern standards, very primitive television sets with just RF modulation. So you actually had to tune your television into the output that the computer had. So the display quality was poor, really, compared to what you're seeing. So the Commodore 64 for this type of game had a bit of a disadvantage because its processor was clocked slower. It just doesn't have the CPU cycles to throw at the game and do the maths calculations that are required for 3D animation. But it's doing all right, to be honest, looking at it. Now you'll notice it's flickering quite a lot. Now that's something that's common with the BBC version as well. You can notice the sort of FPS on the BBC version is quite a lot better than the Commodore, and that's really just a function of the speed of the processor, because the same people who program these two versions of the game. The Commodore 64 version is very much a port of the BBC version for that environment. The BBC is also employing a neat mode trick. The top half of the display is rendered in a high resolution mode. Somebody will know the precise mode numbers. I know them numbered mode 0, 1, 2, 3, and so on and so forth. So there's a neat trick going on here, and that the top part of the display is being is registered in a high res mode with limited colours, whereas the bottom half of the display, in order to get the colours in, is rendered in a low res mode. Okay, and that's something that the BBC could do. It could alter its display resolution dependent upon what it was doing. Okay, so you could have more colours but lower resolution, or less colours and higher resolution. That's how the BBC worked. So there we go. So Kelvin is looking it up. 1.023 megahertz for the NTSC version. That would be the United States version, and 0.985 megahertz for the PAL version, which was the one that we got in the UK. And then the BBC running at 2 megahertz. And actually, Commander Terekoff there talking about the UK 101, which was a computer my dad built way back in the day. Didn't have graphics capability, that one, so no Elite for those early ships. But that was a cool computer. That's the first computer I ever used, the UK 101. Predecessor way before all this stuff. This was advanced stuff by the time. in comparison. So, and now the flickering. In order to boost performance, the David Braben and Ian Bell, I don't know which of them was responsible for it, but they came up with a clever trick here that only not all of the ship is being drawn at any given time. Okay, if I click outside the window here, it'll pause the emulation, and sometimes it'll betray itself. There you go. By the fact that not all of the ship is being drawn all of the time. Okay, so it's a clever little performance trick that they used, and what they were doing, because of the old CRTs that these games were being put into, the phosphors on the CRT didn't fade out like LCD displays do today. Instantly, the response time of the LCD display of the CRT display is very slow compared to to modern technology. So you could get away with not drawing all the ship because the latency, if you like, of the CRT display was enough to keep showing the graphic and make it look solid. And you can emulate this effect on the emulator here to make it look more like it did on those CRTs. And I've got an option, I've found it here, called motion blur, and I'm going to put 2-frame motion blur on this, and then suddenly it becomes smooth. So the emulator is now emulating the lag of the CRT, which is quite fun. So so the BBC was using some clever tricks to up the frame rate. The Commodore 64 is doing the same thing. So if you look at the Commodore 64 version, it's flickering today in order to and that's the emulator showing that, but it didn't look quite so bad back on the televisions of the day because the flickering wasn't nearly so obvious. Compare and contrast with the Spectrum version. Now the Spectrum version isn't written by David Braben and Ian Bell, didn't employ the same tricks. So it's more of a copy rather than a port. Now the Spectrum's using a completely different processor called the Z80A, which actually ran faster, but and I've looked online for comparisons between the 6502 and the Z80, and generally speaking, most people say that the pound for pound, and you can't directly compare them, but pound for pound, the 6502 is about twice the horsepower of the Z80 at a given clock speed. So a 3.5 megahertz ZX Spectrum is not quite as computationally powerful as a 2 megahertz BBC, but it's more powerful than a Commodore 64 at the 0.9 megahertz. So that, these ratings are things. So in terms of raw power that is available to the computers, the BBC has probably got the most horsepower here. The Spectrum is in second place, and the Commodore 64 is in third because of the raw horsepower of the environment that you've got. And that's in terms of doing this kind of game, because the Elite is all about vector graphics, the line drawings. It's basically trigonometry, and you need a processor that can crunch maths in order to do that. Now the Spectrum frame rate is lower, but there is, as you can see, there is no flicker. The Spectrum is drawing the entire ship all of the time, and that's the way these games work. So it's rather different. Now in terms of, again, so in general impressions, if we go back to the BBC. Fastest frame rate, no doubt about it, despite the flicker, okay, which you kind of get used to, and it didn't look so bad on the CRT monitors at the time. Okay, so it draws on the back buffer and then copies it to the main screen. So there you go. So and the spec is using a frame buffer. So different ways of implementing these sort of things, and then so the BBC's winning in terms of its frame rate. It's definitely faster. The Commodore 64 is trying the same technique, but it doesn't have the horsepower in the CPU to kind of match it. It's struggling to keep up a good frame rate. The Spectrum frame rate, as displayed here, doesn't look all that great, but it's definitely a lot smoother. You haven't got that flicker at all. In terms of the screens, well. It's a bit of this one I think is really down to personal preference and which version of Elite you used first. To me, looking at this with my sort of jaded ZX Spectrum views, the bottom display looks like a right mess to me. It's low res, it's hard to read, it's difficult. But I think if you're used to that, then you're probably okay. The ZX Spectrum version to me looks much more pleasant to, on the eye. It's easier to read, but it's got less colour. It's a ZX Spectrum. But it's, to be honest, that console display to me is nice and sharp and far easier to read than the BBC version. Although I'm going to give another little nudge to the Commodore 64 here, because I think although it's got relatively low resolution here, compared to the Spectrum at least, they've done a good job on the display. There are more colours here, and it just looks nicer. So I think the Commodore 64 actually looks quite attractive here. It looks like a proper version of the BBC, if you see what I mean. Whereas the BBC's got a very garish colour scheme there, with those, that yellow and green and red jolts to me with the rest of the display. As the Commodore 64 is using its nice muted colours, I think, to quite good effect. And that looks like a bit more of a computer dashboard. I think the Spectrum one wins on clarity, and the fact that the console area, if you like, takes up a little bit more of the real estate on the screen, actually makes it easier to read. But it's subjective. There's less screen room available on the Spectrum, as you can see at the top. And a similar thing is happening on the Commodore 64, whereas the BBC Micro has a curiously stretched screen. It's very tall. And that's just a function of the resolution. So, Wintermute says the BBC version looked better when viewed on the TV. The emulator, is struggling because of the way that the game was written to render it in the way it was seen on the BBC. But there we go. If Elite had come along later in the C64s, like, they could have done a better job with the graphics. Now, this is an interesting thing actually. But bear in mind, going back, okay, when we boot up, let me just reboot the Spectrum for a moment. You will notice that the Spectrum, the version that I'm using, the 48K Spectrum, is here, copyright 1982. Okay, I don't know what. Let's just have a quick look. What does the Commodore 64 version say? How do I reset it? There it is. So the Commodore 64 version, it doesn't have a copyright statement. It just says, okay, so we don't know. Does the BBC? How do I reset the BBC? There it is. No, it doesn't. Okay, so the BBC doesn't tell you what date it was built. So, and neither does the Commodore, which is a bit of a shame. But they're very much of a muchness. Okay, these computers are. So is the 64 that late? Because I'm pretty sure the Commodore. When was the Commodore out? Who knows when the Commodore 64 was first made available? Because the BBC was out before the Spectrum. I know that for sure. So the BBC is out in 1982, definitely. I'm pretty sure the C64 was out at the same time. Maybe not quite as early. It was 82. Okay, so so this is 1982. Now the interesting thing is, okay, there we go, 1982. So they're all comparable. Okay, so 1982 is the year these came out. Bear in mind, Elite is written in 82, 83. And then comes out in 84. Okay, the programming techniques that made the most of these computers, they weren't all known. Okay, now if you compare, and I did a little check on this. If you compare, the Elite, okay, the frame rate here for Elite on the Spectrum version. This is just an example. I know you're looking at maybe 1, 2, 3 frames per second maximum. Okay, so it's not great. Compare and contrast with a game that came out a little bit later. Okay, a little bit later. This is a game called Starion. This is an Elite-alike really for the Spectrum. But notice, a more complicated ship there and a far faster frame rate. Okay, and you can see that this game came out a little bit later. It's got nothing to do with Elite, by the way, but. I'm using this reference here simply for the fact that it shows the Spectrum could do vector graphics at a much higher frame rate than the Elite, the Elite version of the Elite for the ZX Spectrum showed. So the Spectrum, if you could do the maths well and do the coding well, was faster than you would necessarily expect, having seen the frame rate of Elite on that environment. So. coding tricks and optimizations of how you wrote games for these early computers evolved in those early 80s years. So because we're looking at a snapshot of these games in about 84, 85, not all of those tricks were understood. So the games that are around at this time are not as optimized as they could have been. And it's a shame that they didn't maybe rewrite them later on and improve them. But of course, time moved on and the 16-bit era happened. So Frank Miner there, I remember Starion talking about how they optimized the clear screen operation. So you could get more performance out of the computer than these early versions of the game showed. So in some ways, although Elite is an amazing game and we talk about it a lot, it is not technologically showing these machines at their best. So there were tricks that could have been optimized. So given that, we have to give these computers a little bit of a we have to be favourable. We have to be fair. So anyway, so there we go. Commodore 64. Let's get the BBC back up and running. Because the idea here really is to compare Elites, but it's quite fun to talk about the actual hardware and stuff. So I'm just going to get Elite loaded as well. I love the emulator makes the disk drive sounds, which I think is rather nice. Okay, so the BBC gets a nice little loading screen there as well. So there we go. So now, so first things first, load new commander. Well, we haven't got the commander to load, so no. Then we get a crate, which is jolly nice, and then we get the main user interface. So Commander Jameson. We are in Lave. We have 100 credits, and we have a front pulse laser. All fine. Okay. Commodore 64. We have load new commander. So no. Is the emulator working? Oh, there we go. Oh, hang on, let's just try that again. I want to show each screen. There's sometimes a little bit of lag on these emulators. Right, so no. Right, there we go. So Space or Fire Commander. We get an adder instead. Space or Fire, and then Commander Jameson. So you can see that these two computers are very, very similarly programmed. It looks exactly the same. Spectrum version doesn't do that little zoom of the ship. Remember, the Spectrum version is a port, so we'll do a no on the. Oh, there we go. Get the focus right. It just makes the ship appear, and this time we get a Python. So press Space Commander, and there we go. So a little. There we go. We're in the same place. Commander Jameson Lave. We have 100 credits. We have a front pulse laser. All the games start in the same place. Okay, which is good. But a little bit of use of colour on the Spectrum, just to lighten things up. So again, BBC. Interesting enough, on the BBC, the UI always stays on the screen, the console of the ship, which is just one of those things. It disappears on the Commodore 64 when it's in text mode, and also on the Spectrum it disappears as well. Just one of those things. So there we go. Right, so I'm going to try and do a milk run, okay? Hopefully this will work. I'm going to try to do a milk run in all three versions of the game. So I'm going to figure out what the keys are. So I think F3 on the BBC gives us, that's the equipped ship. So I want to buy, sell, F1, there we go. I'm going to buy 16 tons of food and then 4 tons of textiles. I'm going to, now the BBC uses the function keys, which the Spectrum doesn't even have function keys. So now, does anybody know what the flight controls are? Or does it, it responds to, there we go, it responds to the cursor keys. Okay, D selects. Does anybody know what the launch button is on the BBC? I think it's F10, because I think it was F0 on the BBC, but there is no F0 on modern PCs, so I think it's been swapped to F10, if I'm right. So here we go, I'm going to try and launch. And the disk drive does something. There we go, we launch. Boom, okay, so we're out in space. Okay, now, first things first, right, I need to slow down. Right, does anybody know what the throttle controls on the BBC are? I found the speed up one, which is space. It's not that. Oh, there we are. It's question mark. Okay, question mark slows us down to a crawl. Presumably we've got rear view, left view, right view, and F10 presumably is front view. Okay, there we go. Right, so I know what I'm doing. Question mark to slow down. There we go. So now the first thing to notice on the BBC version is we get a weird sort of spinning planet effect. Okay, I'm not sure quite what this is supposed to achieve. Yeah, is it just there to show that the planet is a sort of pseudo three-dimensional object, or is it trying to show it's rotating, or what is it trying to show? Because it's not rotation, because it's sort of spinning it's spinning on two axes simultaneously. So that doesn't seem right. So I'm guessing it's trying to sort of show it's a sphere, but it's an odd. Yeah, that's pretty much it, Frank. Yeah, just drive my car off. Where's the brake? So it's quite a clever effect, but it looks to me a little bit. It's a bit showy for not really that much gain, to be honest. It's a bit weird. It looks like I'm looking at a basketball, but it does. It sort of looks cool. So, and another thing is the star movement, which you can see. Now, you can see that and they're not really stars, are they? I call them stars, and we always called them stars at school, but they're not. They can't be stars, right? Because you can see them and they're moving past the ship. So they are actually bits of space fluff, whatever that is, just to give you the impression of movement. What I quite like about the BBC version here is that there are two different sizes of space fluff. Okay, there's big bits and there's small bits, and then actually they get bigger as they move towards you. So, but notice there, where's the flying keys? Right, so there you go. Look at this is the frame rate of the BBC in space without anything else on the screen, which is fine. The moment the planet comes into view, that frame rate takes a shocking dive. It's really bad. It's really noticeable. So suddenly, zoom! It's like turbo mode, and I've got to render a planet. So that's interesting to observe. And again, there's the space station, which doesn't seem, to be honest, to be suffering from any frame rate drop. Now the frame rate there is actually really good. That's really nice and smooth. It's not as smooth as it was when there wasn't anything on the screen, but it's pretty good. But there's a big lag in the roll. So as you first press a button, if I press it now, it takes a moment before the ship reacts, and I don't know if that's genuine. It just takes a moment to get rolling, and once it's rolling, it does fine. It's like there's some lag in the controls, which makes your ship feel a little bit seasick. But it's not a frame rate issue. It's just the way the controls are programmed, I think. So it takes a moment for the ship to, as you can see actually on the roll indicators, it takes quite a long time for the ship to get up to its maximum roll speed. So that's just a difference in handling, really. Going back to the planet, and that compass is really hard to read. Okay, so I'm assuming there a big circle, a kind of big block there is is kind of it's in front of you, and when it's behind you, it disappears and becomes a sort of a line, really, and that's really just a factor of the low res screen, I think. So that's interesting to observe. So there's the planet again, and the frame rate drops catastrophically when that comes onto the screen. Let's get this. I just want to muck about with it. Let's get the space station on the screen at the same time as planet. I quite like what happens there. The speed indicator jumps to red to indicate you're using maximum throttle. Oh yes, the BBC could use. You're quite right. The BBC could use. Right, so there. Okay, so now we've got the space station and the planet on at the same time, and yeah, the game is now. Oh, it's horribly. It's quite stodgy. It does make a massive difference, that planet being on the screen at the same time. But I wouldn't say it's dropping to the sort of aesthetic spectrum levels of frame rate, so it's still better than that. Oh look, something is launched. So that's good. I've not seen the BBC version do that before, actually. It has actually launched another ship. What ship is it? It's a Python. There we go. So it's launched a Python, and the Python's going about its business. So the frame rate there, you know, okay, because quite a lot of stuff happening on the screen. So you know, we've got to be fair, but definitely a noticeable difference when it's got a lot of stuff to do. Okay. And it bothers me that Energy Bank 1 is never quite full. Oh yeah, it's not, is it? Look at that. How weird. Yeah, Kelvin, I prefer low but continuous frame. Yeah, so there's a definite. So here, you know, look how laggy the controls are at this point because of the frame rate drop, and then as you get into it's like a slideshow there. As you get it off the screen, suddenly it's like ultra responsive. The ship is beautiful now. If it was like that all the time, it would be awesome. But it just isn't when the thing's on the screen. So that's an interesting effect of, you know, the complexity of the frame rate. So that's the BBC. Right, let's go to the Commodore 64, compare and contrast before we do our milk run. So here we go. So we're docked at Lave. Now I've got to figure out the keys. Somebody had the Wikipedia page up earlier on. I'm going to see if I can go find it in the chat. Because right, here we go. C64 controls can be found here. So controls, there we go. Right, okay, so in order to buy something, we should be pressing 1. Yes, yes, it works. Awesome, good. Thank you very much, Kilobaglar. So let's do the same thing. So 16 tons of food. A little bit of colour there on the C64 and the beep. Okay. Let's have a look at the local map, which should, nope, I don't want, there we go, 5, which should give us the local map. I've got cursor key controls there, locked onto Leasty. How do I launch? How do you launch? Where's the launch? Space, yeah. Looks like most of the controls are actually very similar. I just can't find the launch button. Must be 0, surely, maybe. Is it 0? No, it's not 0. How do you launch? Come on, somebody on the C64 must remember how to launch. It doesn't say in these numbers. FD01, so hang on, so we've got 1 is buy, yeah. There's the market price screen, there's our equipment screen. 9 is inventory, 0 you kind of would expect to be launch. Just try every button. F1, maybe it's F1? It is F1, well done. There we go, right. Okay, now the Commodore 64 version is rolling for some reason. Well, that's interesting. Did it do that because it was matching what the space station was doing? I wonder. I'm not sure. There we go. The button left of 1. No, it was definitely F1. So anybody wanted to know, it was definitely F1. So at least it is on the emulator. Okay. Okay, so compare and contrast, right, so what we've got here. So again, that planet is flickering, but that's probably an artifact of the way the game is programmed for the CRT. They haven't done that 3D thingy, okay? They haven't done that 3D thingy at all with the planet, so that's good. Now, initial feeling there is that without that, yeah, see there's that odd delay in the controls to me, exactly the same as the BBC, a reluctance on the initial turn-in, which is interesting. But other than that, that frame rate looks okay to me. Oh, something just went. What happened there? Did something just blow up? All right. Okay. So. There's a rear view. Something just. Actually, no, that's the space station. So I don't know. It sounded like something blew up. I got rear-ended by something, did I? Oh yeah, my off shields went down. Okay, so Okay, so a few nice things about the Commodore 64 version here. Yeah, this literally is the first time I've ever played Elite on the Commodore 64. Is the frame rate is definitely lower, but it's not. It's not different. Oh, it is a little bit there. Okay, so it's picked up when there's nothing on the screen, but it's not as noticeable as the BBC version when the graphics come onto the screen. So let's just get the space station. Very slow to accelerate there. Very slow to accelerate. And yeah, it's definitely faster there when it hasn't got anything to render. So let's just turn around, and that puts. Whoa! Yeah, okay. Chug 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 chug. And let's oh look at oh yeah okay so actually it looks like it's just launched the ship. That is now really rather sluggish. I'm just trying to roll left and right, and that's surprisingly sluggish actually. Look, you can almost see it updating. There is another ship and the space station and the planet on screen at the moment, but that is very slow. So yeah, I can see the visually it looks nice though. I think the fact the crosshairs are coloured is nice. It looks friendlier, more I don't know, more sophisticated graphically than the BBC version. But yeah, that frame rate is dug 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 dug. That isn't great, is it? Is the roll lag just the roll rate being controlled? And it could be. Yeah, I can see the indicator moving. Now that's something that the Spectrum version I don't. Yeah, it is. So what's actually happening here is because I'm playing on keyboard rather than the joystick, is it's accumulating the movement for the roll, isn't it? 1, 2, 3, 4. It's got sort of 5 different settings from 0. Instant enough, it cancels back to the D10, the middle section, instantly. But that does mean that at least on keyboard, the game is a bit sluggish to play. So it has been optimised for a joystick on the C64 and on the BBC, which is interesting to note. So okay, so that's that. So it's probably intentional, but I'm not playing with the joystick. So at some point maybe I should revisit that. So I can't. I'm going to diss it a little bit of a point on both of them because I am playing on keyboard and this is a level playing field for all the games. But I don't know how much a joystick was back in the 1980s and how many people with BBCs did have joysticks, and the same with the Commodore 64 is probably higher than it would have been for the ZX Spectrum. I always played Elite on keyboard, so it wasn't optimised for the joystick on the BBC. Okay, well that's interesting. Okay, so let's go back to the Spectrum compare and contrast. Now you have seen me do this before, and again, cards on table. I know the Spectrum version better. It's the one I played, so I am biased. There's no doubt about it. But it's interesting to compare and contrast. So let's do the same thing on the Spectrum. We want to buy. Interesting enough, the initial quantities of stuff that's available here slightly different. There's the Spectrum's display. We don't have any cursor keys on the Spectrum, so you actually use the flight navigation keys to select those things. I think the font the Spectrum uses is a bit friendly and Comic Sans, isn't it? But it is easier to read, I would say, in general terms. But there we go. So I'm going to launch. Now I think the Spectrum launch sequence is much better than the other two. Okay, it looks like you're launching out of at least you're going down a tunnel, obviously, it gives you a sense that you're coming out of a space station. Where the other two is just like a weird hexagonal pattern. Now that is partly because the program of this knew that the Spectrum had a very optimized circle drawing routine. If you look at, let me just do the BBC version very quickly here. You'll notice the planet is actually a sequence of straight lines. It's not a very optimized circle, whereas the Spectrum circle is as good as an 8-bit computer can do at all times. The Spectrum had a built-in routine for drawing circles, which it could use to good effect here. There is none of that lag, although actually looking at the Spectrum version, it is accumulating the control. It's just not accumulating it as much as the BBC and Commodore 64 versions is. So I've got far more, at least to me, feeling-wise, I've got a more maneuverable ship than I have on the BBC and the Commodore 64, at least in initial sense. The Spectrum version picks up to maximum speed in about a second and brakes at the same sort of rate. So it feels like a more responsive ship. Again, compared to the BBC, how fast does it accelerate? It takes a long time. Look, it takes ages to get up to speed. So it's sort of 0 to 60 and brakes. The Spectrum is way faster. And I think we'll probably find the same on the Commodore 64, is if we accelerate on the Commodore 64, it's sluggish, okay? It takes a long time for the engines to ramp up to speed. Now that's an implementation choice that I'm assuming that the programmer has made. Now, David Braben and Ian Bell obviously made the ship relatively slow to accelerate. Whoever decided to code the Spectrum version said, sod that for a game of shoulders. This ship's going to be, this ship is going to accelerate much faster. So we've got a much higher thrust, okay, and braking capability on the Spectrum. And I would say, based on that, I'm going to just sort of let's try and make this as equal as possible. I'm going to put just the do some performance stats. Okay, so there's a Python that's just appeared out of the Spectrum version. In fact, I think 2 Pythons have just appeared out of the Spectrum version there. So let's just do a planet-based one. So I'm just going to take time, roughly how long it takes to do a complete roll. Okay, I need a timer. Have I got a timer? I must have one on my phone somewhere. How does that work? Clock thing. There we go. This is going to be very inaccurate, but we'll do our best. Right, I'm going to kind of do a roll. Okay, so go. Was that 2 rolls or 1 roll? I think that was 2 rolls. Let's try that again. Right, and go. Okay, so that's half a roll, and no, it was a full roll. Stop. There we go. Right, so the Spectrum rolls in about 7 seconds. Okay, let's compare that to the other ships. Right, so let's go back to the Commodore 64. So there's no comparison in thrust. Okay, so the Spectrum wins that one easily, gets up to speed much faster. Let's try the Commodore 64 version in a similar scenario, just out of interest. This is a little bit Top Gear for old computers. Right, so let's reset. Okay, so here goes the Commodore 64. Oh, and I'd say that's faster. That's definitely faster. Yeah, 6 seconds. 6 seconds for the Commodore 64. So the Commodore 64 wins the roll, at least so far. Right, what about the BBC? Now the BBC's got this wacky thing going on with the lines, so that may go against it in this competition. We'll find out. Ready? 3, 2, 1, go. Dun, dun, dun. Roll, roll, roll. Oh, that's quite good. I'd say that's quite fast. And stop. 6.5 seconds. So actually, interesting enough. There we go. So that's probably enough top gearing around. But I'm just rolling around. So literally, actually, the Spectrum version, whilst the acceleration is good, its roll is not as good. Okay, it's not its roll. Its roll is not as good. So let's try the let's try a loop. Okay, I'm going to try the loop. Do the same thing, but with a loop. Right. So here we go. Right, I'm going to try a complete loop. 3, 2, 1, go. Oh, no. It didn't have the screen selected. Right, 3, 2, 1, go. Right, so complete loop. I've got to get back to the same point on the planet. The Spectrum has got a few other bits on the screen, which is a bit of a shame, but it's only roughly. So pull a loop in about now. Okay, 15 seconds it takes to roll the Spectrum version. Right. Okay, so Commodore 64. Let's get that lined up. Okay, so Commodore 64, can it beat 15 seconds? And go. Come on, Commodore, you can do it. Dun, 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 Oh, there's the space station. It's coming, it's coming, it's coming. Come on, a complete loop. Now, 18 seconds. Okay, so Commodore definitely lost that one. What about the BBC? Okay, so here we go, right, and the BBC, go. Bum, 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 bum. Oh, it's picking up speed. Oh, that was fast. That was 12 seconds. Now, difficult to do that completely accurately because there's different stuff on the screen. So interesting enough, what that shows is the Spectrum version has way better acceleration and braking. Okay, so it's got more powerful thrusters on its Cobra Mark III. The Commodore 64 wins in the roll, so it can bank better. But the BBC has the best pitch. Okay, so nobody's winning. But yeah, there wasn't a space station, so we ought to try that again to make it fair. But it's just it's only indicative stuff. It's really hard trying to keep these games on a level playing field. But anyway, so there we go, ish maybe. So no, we're all in the same ship. So ostensibly, this is exactly the same ship. This is a Cobra Mark III. So that's what that looks like. Right. So let's do a hyperspace jump. Okay. So we've got locked on the destination H for hyperspace. There we go. Hyperspace to Leasty. Hyperspace countdown. There is the hyperspace effect, and we're here. Okay. So that was hyperspace on the BBC. Looks exactly like the docking effect. Maybe with a few colours in it. Same thing on the Commodore 64. H presumably. There we go. Hyperspace to Leasty. Countdown time is a little bit slower. Okay, quite nice sound effect though from the SID chip. The Commodore benefiting from the best sound chip on these computers. Spectrum. Hyperspace. Oh, I haven't set the hyperspace destination apparently. Of course I have. There we go. Right, hyperspace Leasty. No amazing special effects. There's the Spectrum. Again, the Spectrum showing off its use of circles. So that, again, I think a better effect. I know it's the same as the docking one, but the same criticism can be levelled at the BBC and the Commodore 64 there. But genuinely a feeling of movement, which I think is better on the Spectrum. So I'm going to give the Spectrum nod for the hyperspace and the tunnel effects there. I think those are better. Right, so here we are on the BBC. Let's see if we can get to the space station and do a trade. Okay, so out here in deep space, the frame rate's amazing. Really feels fast. And there's the Death Star effect that people have been talking about. So again, it's clever, but it's actually, I mean, it's supposed to be a planet. So why would there be a blob rotating on it? I don't really get what they were trying to achieve. It's sort of it feels a bit like showing off. We put this in because we can. So anyways, let's get us up to maximum speed. There we go. And it definitely feels faster. Okay. I mean, we're traveling through space. The feeling of traveling through space is faster than on the Spectrum version I remember. Right. So we're going to Tourist Drive to. And here's another thing that I remember. Okay, there is no animation of the jump sequence at all. It just literally jumps, and it's beeping to tell us that we're presumably mass locked at that point. So no animation of the jump sequence there. I'm guessing we now just need to fly forward until we pick up the space station. And yeah, so that I mean, is it a big crater? Well, if it is, that planet's rotating really fast. But it is insta jump. It is literally insta jump. It's just boom, boom, boom. We're there. So that's a bit odd. But you know, this is the original BBC. That's what it's arguably supposed to be like. So that's interesting. So how long do I have to fly at I can't do anything at the moment. So that's. I'm waiting for the space station thingy to appear, so I'm just going to have to hang around there. Anyway, what I'll do is I'll throttle down. Let's do the same thing on the Commodore 64. See how that compares. Okay, so we are here in the. Oh, actually, it looks like we might have a pirate coming in. We do. That's. We have a pirate, so I'm actually going to have to try and deal with these guys. Which one's firing at me? That one. Okay, so actually. Okay, so I've got some nice sound effects going. That is a crate. So, oh, it's this. I've got really jumped by a bad bunch of pirates here, which is rather mean. Definitely better sound effects than the Spectrum. Frame rate's not outrageously bad. Quite hard to hit though. Look. Yeah, I got one. I'm not sure if I'm going to. That's really been rather mean to me, to be honest. Where's the other ship? See, the low resolution of the display is really hard for me to figure out what I'm actually fighting. There's another. Oh, there's two other ships. Which one's firing at me though? Oh, that's a cargo canister. That's no good. So it must be that one. Is that a? It's chucked another. That's a sidewinder. Okay. Yes. Look at me with my elite skills. Right. It's very hard to read the display. Let's see if we can get out of here. Where's the planet? I wanted to. I was trying to compare the tourist drive, but the game had other ideas. I'm hoping that's not a ship out there. I think that's just a cargo canister, so I should be able to jump. Yeah, there we go. There we go. The jump works. Again, same thing. I just get a beep, and no torch drive animation. Oh, so the Commodore 64 version is being quite mean to me, right? It's supposed to be a milk run. At least the system is supposed to be well controlled. So that's a bit surprising. Let's try that again. So I want to go 1, 16. So I'm surprised at that. Launcher was F1, wasn't it? There we go. So yeah, that's. I'm just going to move the screen over there. That'll be easier to play then. Right. So how do I get to? There's the short range chart. Okay, and go. Let's try that again. Countdown is definitely slower. Yeah, challenging game. Yeah. So well, Listi is supposed to be a corporate state, so it's not supposed to be infested with pirates. So I'm a bit surprised to see that it is. If we look at the, if we can find it. Listi is supposed to be. Where's the? There we are. It's supposed to be a corporate state, so there aren't supposed to be any pirates here. So it's a bit mean, to be honest, chucking pirates at you at that point in the game. Anyway, let's see if we can jump again. No jump drive animation. Okay, there we go. So we've got close to the planet again, same way as we did before. So that's the Commodore version. Right, compare and contrast Spectrum version for the same thing. Now, the one thing I do like about the Spectrum version here is there's a new thing that the Spectrum version has. I hadn't realised this initially. This green sphere here is a Spectrum only feature. Okay, it's an alert indicator. So green basically means no worries. Yellow means potentially something bad about to happen, and red stroke flashing red means you've got problems. Now I've got a pirate closing in on me, so I'm going to have to deal with them. Now I'm hoping my Spectrum skills are good through long practice. So I should be able to dispatch this pirate, I would hope, fairly fast. That looks like a Cobra though. So yeah, here we go. Okay, let's come around. And the problem with this guy is he's got missiles, which in my current state is a problem. Oh, they got him. Excellent, there we go. Right, I got 17 credits for the Cobra. Excellent. Right, let's head back towards the planet. Right, there's another ship there, but I think that one is a non-combat one. I don't get a beep telling me I'm mass locked. I get nothing at all. It just doesn't work. So that's the thing. Let's get that ship out of range. So I've got an alert indicator. Okay, so this is telling me yellow alert. You know, it's very Star Trek, it's yeah, it's because there's another ship present. That looks like an asteroid, so let's go deal with that. Oh, my aim is shocking. There we go. Explosions wise, the Spectrum gives us a red flashing circle. The BBC gives us lots of little bits, and the Commodore 64 sort of you know, slightly smaller little bits. I think, to be honest, I prefer the BBC explosion effect with all the debris floating past, but the Spectrum kind of bang is quite good as well. Right, so there we go. We're back to green. Now watch the Spectrum jump drive. It sort of does a rapid transit special effect, which I think is actually nice. So I think the Spectrum wins there as well. I think the Spectrum wins on the hyperspace effect as well, because it's slightly more elegant. It's slightly more elegant. It gives you more of a sense of travelling through hyperspace, and that gives you more of a sense of travelling through space rather than just insta-jumping ahead. Right, so the Spectrum version now flying towards the space station. There's the space station. We'll look on there and head that way. How are we doing on the BBC? So, the BBC is at 0 speed. It's now there's a slightly annoying thing about the emulator on the BBC. Unless it has focus with the mouse, it doesn't work. You know, if I take the mouse focus onto one of the other emulators, it stops. It's really annoying, which means I can't keep it progressing. So I'm going to have to keep it on here for a bit so we can get to the station, because I haven't got a docking computer at the moment. So we'll leave it until the space station appears. I'm just going to move to the Commodore one, which is nicely travelling towards the space station. In fact, it almost died there because it crashed into the planet. Hang on a minute, let me just adjust that. There we go. I shall keep an eye on the Commodore one because it's moving away. The Spectrum version is also closing on target now. So I'll throttle them down when they get into range. Right, so the BBC seems to be taking a long time to get in range of the space station. Oh, there it is at last. There it goes. Right. Okay. So there's the space station down there. There it is. Right. Okay. So we're closing on space station in all versions of the game. Okay. Right. So we're nearly there on the Spectrum version. The Commodore version. Let me just adjust heading. There we go. Keep the BBC version right. So the Spectrum version is, we're almost at the space station now. There it is. So I'll throttle that version down. That's the Commodore 64 version is almost in range of the space station as well. I think, is that the space station or is that something else? No, space station's behind me. I'm traveling completely the wrong direction. I'm good at this. No, really. There's the space station. Right. Okay, head over there. And the BBC version is still closing on target. There we go. Okay, so is anyone keeping score? Well, to be honest, there aren't any winners or losers here. It's more a comparison of what they're like and you know which one has pros and cons. I think, to be honest, the BBC has to win. To be honest, yeah, if there is the winner, because it's the first one. It's the definitive article. You know, it's like the first Golf GTI. It's the first hot hatch type thing. You know, it may not be the best ever, but it's the first one, so it's the standard by everything else is judged. So yeah, I think probably the BBC is kind of, you know, it's the daddy, isn't it? But the other versions bring some other stuff to it, which the BBC doesn't. Right, Let me just throttle back the Commodore version here. Pull on the brakes. Oh, it's so slow on the throttle. That's really weird. Right, let's go back to the BBC and let's see if we can dock. Okay. Yeah, no winners or losers. We have to tell the Commodore and BBC people that. Yeah, that's right. The system with the most troubles wins. I love it. How about the system with the most missions wins? Because as we know, as we have discovered, the ZX Spectrum did have 4 missions, whereas the Commodore 64... Well, actually, the BBC had 2 missions. The Commodore guys can argue, I think reasonably, that the Trumbull's was also a mission. So that gives you 3 on the Commodore 64. But the Spectrum still wins there because it had 4 missions. Although one of the missions is really, really bad, which is the pirate mission, as we discovered, is an atrocious mission on the Spectrum. Right, so interesting enough, here's another point for the Commodore 64 and the BBC, is that you have more than one type of space station on the Commodore 64 and the BBC. As you can see here, this is the dodecahedral space station, not the normal Coriolis one. So it is, I'm assuming, slightly small. It uses a different model. So you've got 2 types of space station in Commodore 64 Elite and BBC Elite. The Spectrum only ever has the one type, so points for the BBC and the C64 there, I think. Right, let's see if I can do the docking. Okay, so this is looking a little bit failed. Failed on the docking. Oops. Oh dear. Right, I'll try my hand again on the Commodore 64. I can normally dock. I don't know what I did wrong there. I mean, maybe on the Spectrum version it's not so sensitive to being lined up. Was I too fast? So the Spectrum version doesn't mind. You have to match rotation on the BBC. Okay. The Spectrum version was a lot less sensitive to that. So that's maybe. Is it the same on the C64? And the red speed indicator says I'm going too fast. I hadn't realised that. See, the Spectrum you can dock at full speed. So it's probably easier then. So that's an interesting point. That's interesting. I can't even see a docking. It's not rendering the docking bay from this angle. Am I on the right side of the space station? Oh yeah, there it is. No, it wasn't it wasn't rendering the entrance. That's interesting. There it goes. It's now rendering the entrance. Right, let's see if we can. Okay, so bear that in mind. Right, so I do need to rotate. The Spectrum version wasn't very sensitive to that. As long as you got the orientation right, you could pretty much fly in at any angle. Okay, so let's back off the speed a little bit. Let's try and go in. Not quite straight. Yes. Okay, so I docked. Anyway, so there we go. We've actually achieved. Look, I can sell that. Oh, a slightly different user interface there. You can sell the whole lot with one key click. That's an improvement, I think. It certainly is over the Spectrum version. Anyway, so successfully docked on the C64, crashed on the BBC. Let's dock the Specky version. Now, I'll prove to you, I hope. Let me just update it, the Spectrum version. Now, the Spectrum version does have another thing. We did see the BBC launch another ship earlier on, but the Spectrum version really goes OTT with the ships. There were 2 Pythons over there. It chucked quite a lot of traffic about. Actually, I'm a bit close to the space station there to dock. Let's turn around and head back to the planet. Let's just get the mouse out of the way. Turn around. Now the Spectrum version was definitely not as sensitive in terms of the docking. So if I go down there and accelerate a bit, the Spectrum version is so much more responsive on the throttle though. That is a big difference between the versions, is how quickly you can accelerate and decelerate. Whether your top speed is similar is difficult to gauge in terms of how the game actually works, but the throttle response. So if I was doing my Top Gear thing, the Spectrum version of the Cobra Mark III is far more, it has far more acceleration. Oh, no, there you go. There's another Python coming out. The Spectrum version was well known for generating a lot more NPC traffic, particularly around space stations. But watch this. I can go in there at full throttle without Python in the way. See, it's like there's no docking control though. I can't go to full throttle now because I'm lined up. Anyway, there we go. The Spectrum version, yes, docked. I was trying to go there at really fast speed and then it spawns a Python in front of me. Anyway, so there we go. We've survived on the Commodore 64 and we have survived on the Spectrum. We didn't survive docking on the BBC. SpecU is definitely Python central. Yeah, it was insane. But there we go. So anyway, so some differences there. That was quite interesting to see. Now the next run. So I'm going to reset all of the games. Okay, so let's go back to the beginning and go back to the thing. I want to try the impossible, which is a run through the RIDQuAT system. Okay, so the RIDQuAT system is infamous, of course, for Elite. So I'm just going to reset all the emulators. Let's start with the BBC because yeah, it's the daddy. I'm going to try a run through the RIDQuAT system. Now the RIDQuAT system is, of course, a complete anarchy system, and it shouldn't be survivable in the default ship that you start with. The Cobra Mark III with a single pulse laser. I am going to die. This is absolute certainty. But it's how far do I get? Okay. How far do I get on the game before I die? And what's the arcade? What's the combat like? Okay, so that's the next thing to evaluate. So no, I'm not going to load a new commander. Yes, I am going to go somewhere where I shouldn't be going. There we go. So we're going to go to the RIDQuAT system. Now the RIDQuAT system is, as we can find out on one of these screens, there we go. It's a poor agriculture, but it's an anarchy system. So basically that means in the original it is swarming with pirates. So I will basically be killed very, very quickly. But in this case, okay, what does the combat look like? Let's investigate the combat. So I will try my hardest to stay alive as long as possible, using all my guile and eliteness to do so. So let's see how well that goes. Right, so what I am going to do is I am going to buy, if I can remember the buy key, I am going to buy the extra missile. So I've got 4 missiles on board. I do just want to know what the missile keys are. Is it T and F like it is on the Spectrum? So I might just try that outside the space station and then reset it again. So let's launch. Here we go. Yeah, we should just compare and contrast the description. So let's just compare and contrast. So that is the description of RIDQuAT. So data on RIDQuAT, distance 6.8, anarchy, tech level 4, population of harmless rodents. I'm assuming the Commodore version will be very similar. So let's go and have a look. No. Space or fire. Let's buy. No, I don't want to do that. Where's the equip? There we go. Buy the extra missile. And launch was F1. We'll do that in a moment. Right, where's the map? There it is. Okay, so 6.8 light years, that's correct. Data from RIDQuAT. So it is a poor agricultural anarchy, tech level 4, harmless rodents. This planet is most notable for its fabulous cuisine, but beset by occasional civil war. Now, I'm interested here because I thought the BBC had that same flavour text, but according to this, it doesn't. So, where's that gone? Is that not in the BBC version? The rest of the data is the same, but the BBC is not. Is there a second screen on the BBC that I have to press it again, or something? Doesn't seem to be. It's not giving me the flavour text, which I thought was a feature of the BBC. Does anybody know? Because the Commodore version is giving me this planet is most notable for its fabulous cuisine, but beset by occasional civil war. Let's see what the Spectrum version does. Because I'm pretty sure the Spectrum version's got all the flavour text as well. So let's do that. Buy the missile. go to wrong chart. Grid quat. Yeah, so the Spectrum version has that. Okay, so that looks exactly the same. This planet is most notable for its fabulous cuisine, but beset by occasional civil war. So I'm surprised at that, because I thought, but you know, people talk about edible poets and things in the BBC version. So why is it not showing me the flavour text for the description of the planet? Let's just try another one. So I'm going to go back to the Specky version. Let's go to Tian Isla, just out of fun. No, Zaon's Tian Isla's there. That one tells me, okay, so this world is very notable for its inhabitants' ingrained shyness. Compare that on the Commodore 64. He says randomly stabbing keys trying to find that. There's Tian Isla. Okay, and data on planet. This world is very notable for its inhabitants' ingrained shyness. Okay, so that's there. BBC version. Okay, same thing again. And data on planet. It's not. Lizards. It's definitely lizards in all of them. They've all got lizards on them. Commodore 64 has lizards. 5.2 billion lizards. So 5.2. So it's the same code that's generating it. And the Spectrum version has 5.2 billion lizards as well. But the flavour text is not on the BBC. Which surprises me a lot, actually. Unless it's available somewhere else. Wintermute can't remember. Or some versions did change the flavour text. Okay, so maybe the version I'm getting. Now this is the version that Frontier gave as part of their thingy rejig. So I wonder if this is a slightly later version or a slightly earlier version maybe. It's the disc version. Because it's so, but weird. So that's odd. Is there flavour text from where you're docked? Let's try it on Lave then. So good point. Because without the flavour text, you're missing out on a big bit of the original Elite universe. It's the natty description of the planets. Not there. No, data on Lave is blank on the BBC version. Commodore 64 is yep. Lave is most famous for its vast rainforest and for the Lavian tree grub, which is correct. And the Spectrum version, I'm sure, is exactly the same. Oh, not quite the same, actually. Lave is most famous for its vast rainforest and the Lavian tree warthog. Okay, so warthog has replaced the grub. So the BBC, apparently, at least in this version that we've got, doesn't have any flavour text in it. The Commodore 64 is, I think, the correct lore for Lave. Lave is supposed to have a Lavian tree grub, but according to the Spectrum version, it's a warthog for reasons. Can you buy mining lasers on the BBC version I have? I don't know. Let's find out. Actually, I'm in space at the moment, so let me just reset the game. Let's see if we can on the Specky version. Actually, I'm at the wrong tech level planet. Lave isn't sufficiently advanced in order to do it, so it's not an option at this tech level, unfortunately. Lave is not all that advanced. Commodore 64. Oh, I just launched. Notice the Commodore 64 rolls you as you come out of the space station. That's quite a nice effect. None of the others do that. So I'm assuming here, because we're in Lave, we can't buy anything of that level because it's not. No, in fact, we can't even buy an escape pod here, according to the BBC version. Sorry, click on the wrong screen. We can on the Spectrum version, interesting enough. We can buy an escape pod, but we can't on the BBC. The prices are similar. Although they're not quite the same. Pulse lasers, actually no, yes they are. ACM system is 600. Yeah, so the numbers are the same. Interesting. Okay, right. So anyway, the RidQuack run. That's what. So some funny things there. So this is the disk version. At least that's the one that Frontier told us. So I don't know. That's a bit weird. Let's buy the missile on the BBC. So we've got all the missiles. Right. So we have all the missiles. Let's launch. Was there an escape pod on the BBC? I don't know. We could check that out by going to these two. Oh, something happened there. Oh, I think that was the Commodore 64 version. Somebody just crashed into the back of the ship. I'm just going to move it away from the space station. You are a traffic menace, Drew Wager. There we go. Right, BBC. Right, so we have now. What's the targeting? Does anybody know how to fire the missiles on the BBC version? Because that's going to be important. So let's get clear of the space station a moment. Now on the Spectrum it's T. Yeah, it's T on and unarmed. T and unarmed. And I'm guessing F is fire. Okay, so there we go. So press on the Spectrum it's F. So maybe it's M on the PC. Anyway, so on the BBC PC. Right, let's go to RidQuack and let's see how we do. So this is going to be, we are going to die, but it's what it's like. This is the process of dying. And see how good the missiles are. So I've got all the missiles. I'm going to try and do a run through the RidQuack system. See how bad it is. So there's the hyperspace. And here we are. Right, we're in RidQuack. So there's the planet. So let's see if we can get through. So throttle up. I'm already mass locked. There's already a ship. Okay, so in fact there's already two ships. So sound effects. Oh, frame rate way higher than the Commodore and the Spectrum here. Way higher. Much more arcadey. Much more visceral, I would say here. And the ship is running away, actually. Don't know what that noise is. That the sound effects are a bit confusing. It has. It's literally run away. That's an escape pod, isn't it? Okay, right. I'm going to have to leave him to die. Right, let's arm a missile. Let's take this guy out with a missile, if possible. It's a sidewinder. Okay. So the game is chucking a lot there. That's right. Okay, so that's the sidewinder. Right, fire. No. Right, missile away. Let's leave the missile to deal with him. Hopefully. Okay, so again, oh, that is a ship. Now that isn't a ship. That's a wretched escape pod. The display is a complete mess. It's impossible to tell what's hostile and what isn't hostile. Which I suppose you will get used to. I don't even know what I'm shooting at. That's a ship. Oh, that's the wretched escape pod again. Where are the ships? Okay, it sounds like that missile hit. So okay, so is that a hostile vessel? Right, I'm going to missile him as well. I don't think that's hostile or not. It looks like it. I've got target lock. Yes. Missile jam. What? That one doesn't seem to be being hostile to me. That's a Python, so I'm not convinced that's a hostile ship. I don't know what that noise means. Is that somebody shooting at me, or what is it? I can't. It's so difficult to read the scanner. That's a ship. That is definitely manoeuvring against me. Surely. Or is that the escape pod again? It's definitely spawning a lot of ships out. Whatever that is. It's not manoeuvring. What Oh, I think I killed it. Whatever it was. That's. Yeah, killed it. Whatever that was is dead. Now, who's firing on me? That one looks hostile. Unarm that weapon. Rearm it. That looks like a hostile ship. I'm not doing too badly. I'm still alive. Yeah, so keep an eye on the shields and stuff for me because I'm. There's quite a lot going on at the moment. It does just seem to be, although the ships don't seem to be all that aggressive. In fact, I'm just sitting here now. That's what the noise is it's the shield being hit. So actually, according to that, what's happening to my energy banks? Now, energy bank 3 there is sort of. So that's me being hit. But it's very hard to tell from where. Which is either of these two hostile? That blip there, that one's definitely right. That's a Cobra. Okay, let's take that guy out. Let's missile him as well. See if the missiles are good. Okay, I got you. Come on, into that crosshairs. There we go. Right, missile. Oh, missile jammed. What's that? I can't fire the missile. Is that because the computer knows there's too many things on the screen, so it's just going to give me a hard time? Now, one thing I will say here is the ships are not dodgy. They're just literally flying in a straight line, and they're really easy to kill. I mean, this is a pulse laser, okay? So it shouldn't really be. So is it recharging? Okay, so this is different. Is it recharging the shields before it recharges the energy banks? Is that the way it works on the BBC? Because I'm not using any power now, as far as I'm aware. It seems to be recharging the shields, so that's actually different. The Spectrum version doesn't work like that. The Spectrum version doesn't recharge the shields until the energy banks are full, whereas this version seems to, the energy banks are transferring power into the shields. I'll slow down to recharge. So there's actually a difference. Okay. So the energies are draining power from the energy banks. Yeah, that's very different. That's not how the Spectrum version does it at all. That's interesting. So you can actually, so there's a bit more power management on the BBC. That's very interesting. Didn't know that. Okay, so if your engines are at full throttle, you can't recharge anything. But look how slow. The recharge is really bad. So if I can presumably throttle up to not quite full, and it'll be all right. The recharge of the shields is incredibly slow. I mean, that's taking hours. I'm still mass locked. Whatever that is behind me, which is there, they are still pursuing me. In fact, here comes another one. Right, so I'm going to deal with this guy. Let's try the missile again. So is that an alert sound, or is that a weapon sound? Right. Missile away. Got him. So the missile worked. Very nice. See, I think that explosion effect is rather good. Right, so this guy behind me. Okay, so there is a little bit of power management that's in the game, which is interesting. Got this lock on. They're not as aggressive though. They're nowhere near as aggressive as the Spectrum ones. Actually, they're loads behind me. Probably not much I can do about that. So now they're here we go, more pirates. That's the sound of weapons hitting shields. Okay, so interesting differences there. That was very different experience in the Spectrum version. So power management for throttle, didn't know that. The ducking and diving of the baddie ships, nowhere near as much. They were flying in straight lines almost all the time, and very, very easy to kill when you had them on target. But it certainly chucked a lot of ships at you in that ultimately that overwhelmed me. So that's the BBC. That was a RidCrap run. So let's try the same in the Commodore 64. See how that compares. Let's just make sure I've got weapons. Okay, keyboard is the same. That's good. Let's go to RidCrap and let us hyperspace. Bye, says Kenny Baglar. So missiles are fire and forget. So the missiles were very effective there. They were totally rubbish on the Spectrum version. Right, where is the planet? There it is. Right. Okay. So let's head for planet. Well, we have a pirate already. Okay. Or three actually. That's a bit mean. And they're shooting. There we go. What have we got here? Okay, so instantly frame rate is definitely lower. They're coming in quite hot. Sidewinder. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So not definitely not as fast as the BBC version, but not outrageously bad. You know, it's still playable. Sound is much clearer, telling me what's going on, to be honest, than the BBC. The BBC sounds were very confusing. It sounded, I don't know what that was supposed to be, but it was, frame rate. Frame rate drop as the star came into view. Oh, what's happened to my ship? I can barely maneuver. That's a disadvantage. Don't fly into the star. That was almost impossible. Jug. Did you see that? That wasn't good. Didn't really notice that with the BBC, but we didn't actually point into the star. It's run away again. There's somebody else shooting at me. Okay, individual one-on-one ship. Again, look, just sitting there waiting for me to blast it. It's only my incompetence with the keyboard controls that's stopping it from being killed. It's sort of dodging up and down a little bit there. Cool, got it. So that's 2 ships down. Hey, I've made some kills on the Commodore 64. Right, so where are the other pirates? Jug. Now, what I do like here, and I don't know what actually. Oh, look, that was a Mamba. Look at that. That's a ship that never existed on the Spectrum version at all. Frame rate is now quite glacial. Yeah, when that sun comes on the screen, you can tell the boom. Yes, skill. Look at that. You can tell the C64 really doesn't like rendering something. Oh, yeah, that is really quite difficult. When it's going all right, when it's only got a few jobs to do, it's actually really good. But the moment anything complex starts to happen, it really, I don't know if this is a baddie or a goodie. How do you tell? Okay, something's firing at me. There's hostile fire coming from over there. Okay. Right, let's try a missile. Missile. Not locked. Slow down. Brakes. Okay, I'm not going to get one of these in missile lock before it comes round. Yeah, so it is now, with all these objects on the screen. Is that missile locked? Yes, it is. I didn't hear the beep. Okay, let's follow that in. Come on, missile, do your thing. The other should be not manoeuvring. So we are. Fire and forget. Come on. No, the missile hasn't hit. I'm going to have to leave that. Did it happen off screen? Can't afford to. Oh, which one's shooting at me now? It is very sluggish to respond to the controls with so many things on the screen. We are asking quite a lot here. What's that? So now this is a feature of the Commodore 64 and the BBC, is you can only fire one missile at a time. So it would seem. No, it's still not letting me. Jug, 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 jug. Basically, whatever you do, don't get the sun on the screen when you're flying. It's virtually impossible. This is quite funny. I'm still alive though. I'm still here. We need to get the sun off the screen, and I've got a chance. So this is a Mamba again, isn't it? Okay, but I mean, both the BBC and the Commodore do much better on sound effects. But like 3 or 4, maybe 5 hits, and you killed the ship. That seems really easy. Okay, so you have to unload and reload. Okay, right. I think that's a different feature. Right, fire. Oh, I see. Yeah. So that's now showing me I've got an empty. Come on, missile, do your thing. Hit. Yes. Awesome. Because I'm actually still alive, which is quite impressive. Now there is, I can see some things on the scanner are showing different colours, which is nice. I don't know what that actually means. Somebody in the chat will tell me. Yeah, the explosion has colours as well. That's a very good point. Oh, somebody else is shooting me. Which one is it? This one. This is what's really hard about this UI, is it's impossible to tell who's actually firing at you. Let's get rid of another ship. Missile jam. That happens a lot. Which I suppose is quite a fun game dynamic. It's a bit mean. You're sort of relying on these missiles. Come on, missile. Come on. No, that missile's not having anything. Don't know what ship that is. Again, it is literally sitting there. Maybe that was an escape pod. Difficult to tell. So I think the shields start restoring once banks 3 and 4 are full, and then banks. Okay, so that's different behaviour. Interesting. So it does work in a different way to the way they coded the Spectrum. But yeah, I can see what you're complaining about now with the frame rate. It is quite hard to play. With a lot of ships on the screen. That's a Cobra Mark III. Haven't seen any of the other ships fire missiles at me though. Nice iconic view of a Cobra there. But yeah, it does seem sluggish to turn. There we go, right. Boom. So I think I'm doing better on the Commodore 64 version than I did on the BBC. The BBC was much, much faster, much, much more visceral. And the only thing I think really here that's stopping me progressing is that the game is literally just chucking ship after ship after ship at me here. And it will eventually wear me down, I think. The shields are almost gone. And what have we got there? Is that an asp? So I have seen a Mamba, that's a first. I've never seen a Mamba in a game before, so that was quite cool. I don't know what that is. See, 5 hits. That is not much, really, for a pulse laser. It's almost as if these ships are flying with their shields down. I don't know how the game scales its difficulty, but that I think is a piece of dip. If I actually, I've still got mass lock, so there's something out here that's definitely a ship, isn't it? Oh, something shooting. No, that's a cargo canister. Something shooting at me. Slow down. Turn. Right, that means my shield is down. I can keep damage now. Yeah. Okay, so I'm probably going to die shortly. But I've made a good fist of it, I feel. Almost had it. Man, well, it is rude crap. Yeah, okay, so I think that's how it. So that was all right. That was all right. I felt I did okay there. So I have not survived on the BBC and I've not survived on the Commodore, which is not surprising. Right, last one. Let's try this, Becky. Right, so I've got this was the one I am most familiar with, so I will have the best chance. Let's compare the combat between these versions of the game. So right, hyperspace to Ridquap. I've got all the missiles on board. Let's see how we do. Right, okay, so let's arm missiles. Right, we'll head for the planet. And okay, a civilian ship. No excuses now, no. That's just a civilian ship. Not giving me not giving me a hard time at all. That I think is a. Yep, that was the first lance. Okay, so I'll be just good. What will happen now is I'll just waltz happily to the planet and win. So here's a review. No pirates at all yet. Is the Spectrum version just toying with me? It probably is. It usually does. Come on. Right. Okay. So okay. A pirate. So the Spectrum's definitely faster than the Commodore 64. Sound effects, no. Pulse laser is totally useless on the Spectrum version. Okay, so so now I think the Spectrum version here has better AI for its combatants, because this ship is trying to dodge me. Okay, and it's doing quite a good job. Okay, right, try that again. And it's firing back. There we go. It's not hitting me there. Right, now it's okay, so that's something I didn't see on any of the other versions. Not to say that they don't, but the Spectrum version has been more aggressive in the sense it's launched a missile at me there. This is an ASP, of course. Right, it's only got one missile, so that's it. But it is more aggressive in the way it's fighting. Every time I get a bead on it, it banks away. That military laser I've got in the other version. Pulse laser. But notice how many times I'm having to hit it. I've hit it dozens of times, and oh, there we go, finally killed it. So it's much tougher, way tougher to kill the ships. You know, on the Commodore 64 and the BBC there, I was hitting it 5-6 times, and that was it, game over. Whereas that ASP I hit at least 15 times before it died. But it's not chucking as many baddies at me, at least not at the moment. All that's there is just debris and one civilian ship. So interesting to compare. I'm still alive at the moment. It was an ASP, okay. Yeah, so the approach patterns were very different. I mean, that's only a single pirate we've encountered. Now, I've definitely seen the Spectrum version throw 5 ships at me simultaneously, so hopefully it will do that in a minute. I mean, yeah, and I'm using the word AI loosely. Because of course it's not really AI. In fact, it isn't chucking any pirates at me. I'm just wondering if did I not bring any cargo with me? Because that will affect the Spectrum version response. I've got a feeling I may not have. I didn't bring any cargo. That's why. So those pirates aren't interested. I might have to restart that. Sorry about this. let's just try it again, because the Spectrum version definitely cycles its difficulty depending on what you're carrying. The other versions may do the same thing. I don't know, but I definitely had cargo in the other versions. So let's just go back and do that again, because the pirates will be much more aggressive if they've got something worth stealing. Right, so let's go to Ridquat again. Right, let's try that again. So the members in the crates are a lighter weight, but they're not that lightweight on the Spectrum version. You get jumped by crates and sidewinders quite a lot on the Spectrum version, and cobras will attack you as well. Okay, so it's being very gentle with me. The Ridquat system is rather sleepy, so it seems on the Specky version at the moment. I think that's just an asteroid. Not being able to hit it. There we go. Destroyed it. Okay, so come on. What is up with Ridquat today? It's really quiet on the Spectrum version. It isn't normally like this. As async. This is probably an asp again. Yep. Oh, I've hit it twice. Four, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. 9 hits. Oh, it killed me. It shot me with a missile at point blank range. So that's not definitive, to be fair, but it's indicative. I think it'd be nice to do a direct comparison with how strong the ships are between the different versions, because I get the impression the Spectrum does normally chuck more ships at you than that. So interesting. I think they're different. You can see that the 64 and the BBC are programmed by the same people, because they behave in the same way. And Elite on the Spectrum is a copy of that behaviour, but different. Little things like the energy banks not being the same. The BBC was definitely the most visceral space combat. To be honest, the sound effects were a bit odd in places, but it felt more vibrant to me playing it. Felt more like I was in an arcade game and actually having to joust and respond and fly around. But the attack patterns of the ships were very, very different, and very easy to counter on the BBC. It was simply overwhelming numbers really that did me away there. Whereas on the Spectrum version, I felt that the ships were trying to dodge and do things, which is interesting to compare. The C64 version was sort of the BBC, but not quite as hard. But the frame rate drop, when we had particularly when we had the sun on the screen, was like watching a slideshow. It was very noticeable. Whereas the Spectrum version doesn't have such a good frame rate as the BBC overall, but it doesn't drop as much in the intense areas, so you don't tend to notice it so much. So interesting comparison. First impressions, the frame rate on the BBC gives it a lot. Okay, the sound effects are pretty good. I think the screen's a bit cluttered and a bit hard to read, and the fact that we've lost that flavour text is a big down on whatever this version is, which is a bit weird, really. Space combat, really, really good. Special effects, I think the Spectrum version comes back quite well on special effects, because it's got that much nicer hyperspace tunnel, it's got the much nicer docking sequence, and it's got that Taurus drive jump thing towards the planet, which the other versions don't have, which I think is much nicer. Frame rate is okay. Better combat AI, I would say, or pre-programmed moves. It's not really AI, of course, at this generation computing for the baddies. The Spectrum has better missions, I would say, overall. It has more variety in the missions. Although the hunt for the Constrictor is fun on the BBC and the C64, but the Spectrum has more variety there. So that's interesting. The C64, I think, overall though, has the more attractive user interface. I like the use of colour here. I think this is clearer, it's easier to read, it's quite nice. It's a little bit low res, it'd be nicer if it was high res, but that's quite good. does suffer dreadfully from the performance hit though. Really noticeable when you're flying around, particularly when the sun comes into view. That's really a tactical disadvantage that the enemies can use against you. So the vector graphics there, it is struggling, but the UI looks much nicer than the BBC. The BBC one is very garish really, but frame rate wise, BBC hands down. Explosions, I like the explosions on the BBC and the C64 better than the Spectrum. The Spectrum just has a big red circle, which I suppose is like a space thing. But the BBC, I prefer that explosion. The missiles work on the BBC when they fire. Okay, they jam up most of the time, but they do actually hit the enemy ships. Now the Spectrum version, the missile code was really dodgy. It almost never hit anything with a missile on the Spectrum version unless it wasn't moving, which made it a bit pointless. So I can't really, with that comparison, I can't really decide on the overall winner. I don't think it's the C64 because there are too many things that make it hard. And I think the frame rate is the biggest thing it struggles with. The sounds are good. The UI is nice. It makes really good use of the colour schemes and the graphics. I think it does a really good job of that. And I really like the sound. I think it's got the best sound. There are the trumbles. Yes, I must give honourable mention to the trumbles. So the trumble mission is unique to the Commodore 64, where you get a creature that will eat stuff in your hold and then infest your screen. Unfortunately, we don't get to see that here. I'll see if I can play it a little bit at some point. So so marks for trumbles. That's a unique mission to the Commodore 64. But that frame rate drop is very hard on the gameplay. So that is a big downer on the C64, I'm afraid. But other than that, it was nice to see some different ships in there, saying the Mamba. That was cool. BBC, definitely the best space combat by far, in terms of the frame rate and the agility of the other ships and stuff. But let down by rather lackluster counter moves from the alien ships, and very easy to kill on both the BBC and the 64. 4 or 5 hits per ship. That definitely isn't the case on the Spectrum. The Spectrum is much harder to kill the enemy ships. So that's interesting. I like the BBC trick with the spinny world thing. Bit of a gimmick, really. It's kind of it doesn't add a great deal to the game. It just feels like you're showing off. So I'm not impressed by that. And it's interesting. I don't think that appears anywhere else. Does it appear on any of the other elites? Sort of a feature that everyone kind of looked at and went, "No, we don't need that. Doesn't really help." So it's an interesting mix. It is an interesting mix. I would choose the BBC for combat in general terms because it's faster, the frame rate's good, and you feel like you're in a more adrenaline type battle. I would take the Spectrum for the AI and some of the special effects and the general feeling of immersion that you get flying around in the ship. The Pythons launching from the space stations all the time, all that sort of stuff. I think the Spectrum wins there. I think the Spectrum wins quite a lot on the clarity of the display and the higher resolution scanner. I think that makes a big difference to playability. So that's good. I'd definitely take the Spectrum on the imagination of the missions. Having the 4 missions, the Spectrum wins hands down on special missions. So for those of you who haven't seen them, you can see those on my YouTube channel. So you have the Supernova, you have Pirates, you have a Thargoid invasion, and you have a cloaking device. So that's good. The BBC only has 2 missions, I believe, which is Thargoid Plans, where you get chased across the galaxy by the Thargoids, and chasing the Constrictor. I don't know if they give you any extra equipment as part of that. On the Spectrum, you get an ECM jammer and a cloaking device as special equipment, which is quite cool. I don't know on the BBC whether you get any additional kit for your ship or whether you just get a reward. So maybe somebody can tell me. And the Commodore 64 obviously has the trumbles, which is the only bit of Elite where it's able to take advantage of its sprite hardware, which is one of the things it does have technically over the Spectrum and the BBC, but it can't use them in this game because there aren't any sprites other than the trumbles. So that was something they added in to take advantage of that effect, which is not something the BBC and the Spectrum probably would have done very well at. So the trumbles are a sprite thing that the Commodore 64 can do in hardware, which the other two computers can't. So we'll give it some extra points for that. So I mean, comparing them all, I can see why the playground arguments happen, because there is no definitive best Elite. there just isn't. Having played all of these and looking at them, spinning beautifully on the screen. Let me just go back to. There we go. I've got them all on the screen doing their thing. Full screen focus. There we go. So there we go. All the versions of Elite simultaneously doing their thing, so I can see why there were playground battles. I really can, because each version brings something to Elite which the others don't have. So the BBC starts off with good frame rate, really good combat, but not the best overall design of the interface. I don't think it's got some limitations there. Its AI for the ships is not great, maybe it scales better. We've only really just done a very cursory play of the games, of course, but it's also got additional things like 2 types of space station, which is nice. A bit of variety there, makes you feel like you're travelling somewhere different. Has that weird trick lines. That's a bit of a gimmick to me. Overall, I think it's still the daddy. I still think it's the daddy in terms of Elite, because it's the original one. Commodore 64, well, the frame rate is its biggest bugbear. It really is. Having played that, it's so noticeable at times that it really makes the game quite hard. But that aside, if you could take that out of the equation, I rather like that version of Elite because it's nice and colourful. Okay, it's using colour much better than the BBC. The fact that it's got multiple colours on screen there is really nice. The fact that the crosshairs have got different colours, you can see things. It's much clearer to see what's going on. So I do like that about the Commodore 64 version. If they could only get up the frame rate, you need about twice the horsepower there on the processor to do. And the Spectrum version, well, I think the Spectrum version fights back surprisingly well. Considering in terms of its hardware capabilities, the Spectrum was never designed for this sort of thing. Okay, the Spectrum has no games hardware in it whatsoever. It was the much cheaper computer. It was half the price of the Commodore 64 at the time, and about a third of the price, I think, of the BBC. So the fact that it's even competitive, and in fact it outdoes the BBC and the Commodore 64 version in quite a lot of categories, I think is a tribute to the guy who recoded it for the Spectrum. They did a very good job of putting everything that the other games had into the Spectrum, despite its limitations, and then adding a bunch of other stuff on top. So, a good question from CW. Is using the emulations a true comparison against the actual machines? Well, these emulators are actually surprisingly good. Okay, they're not perfect, but I've compared the performance of the Spectrum and the BBC on these emulators against the real hardware, and they're virtually indistinguishable. So I'm pretty confident in that. I don't know so much about the Commodore 64, so I'm sort of relying on the people watching the stream telling me whether the emulator feels right or not. But I haven't heard anybody say, no, that's not how it worked at all. So I'm pretty confident that the emulators are giving us a good experience of what these games were actually like on the original platforms. Certainly the Spectrum and the BBC versions are very true to form. So I'm pretty confident in that. So Kelly Baglass telling me yes, the C64 version is pretty close. So I think we're seeing them at their best. I think we're seeing them at their best. But it's interesting to compare. So I think the Spectrum wins back on its missions, its special effects, its immersion. With Python Space Station Time, and the UI I think is very clear and very sharp. It's a bit dull. It's just red. I think the Commodore 64 actually has the best visual interface there, but the Spectrum version is nice and clear. Spectrum version has more aggressive AI on its opponents, and I think it's harder overall, pound for pound. The Spectrum version, the ships punch harder than the other ones do. So interesting to compare. I don't think I can claim it all with it. I am biased towards the Spectrum because it was my computer. But having played these now, they're all worthy. They're all as good as each other, but in different ways. So I think they all have pros and cons, which is I know a bit of a cop-out answer. If I had to choose one, now here's the question: if I had to choose one, which one would I choose? Um, I think at this point in time I would probably choose the BBC because I'm less familiar with it, and it would probably still surprise me. So at this point in time, I would choose the BBC because there's stuff about it I don't know, whereas I've played the Spectrum version to death, and I think the experience on the BBC is more the genuine original article, whereas the C64 is more of a copy. So I'd probably choose the BBC at this point in time. But it's interesting to compare. They all have their quirks. They all have their pros and cons. I just think it's fascinating to have compared. Which one's the best? I don't think anyone is the best. I think they all, they on a sliding scale are different things. I think they all have pros and cons. I like the Spectrum for the missions and the special effects. I like the BBC for the arcade kind of high adrenaline gameplay. But I think the Commodore wins back on presentation. I think it looks nicer. It's got some nice little extra touches in there, like the trumbles, which give it some points as well. So in the playground battles, I think it would just have to have a fight behind the bike sheds and just see who wins, and then that's that's the best version of it. That's the only way to settle it. So it is good on all, and they say that, this game's been ported to some later machines as well. These are the original ones. So that's a very good point, actually. The best one was the one that made you fall in love with the game. So so for me, I'm a Spectrum player all the way back in the day. I've got it on the wall over there. My Spectrum is that's a holy relic as far as I'm concerned. I have great respect for the BBC. I have great respect for the Commodore 64. Nowadays, I wouldn't have said that back in the 80s. You were a scum. You were the enemy. But nowadays, great respect for these games. It's it's fabulous. But it's very interesting to compare. So I'm gonna call it a sort of a draw, really, and just leave it as a celebration of all those original leads. But there we go. So that's my final thoughts on the matter. Thank you ever so much. Well, thanks to Frontier for giving us a copy of BBC, both the emulator and the disk image for free. So thank you very much for that. Thank you very much to Kelly Banglar and folks who helped me get the Commodore 64 emulation working on the Vice emulator. Now the Vice emulator is actually a free emulator. And I got the Elite image from Ian Bell's website. So that's where that came from. The Spectaculator emulator I did buy. I do emulate Spectrum stuff quite a lot, so I thought it was only fair. And I got that one also from Ian Bell's website. So props to Ian Bell, not only for writing this game in the first place, but for making some of the original images free for us to play. Well done for all the people who've written these emulators so that we can still play these classic games on modern hardware without having to get the old kit out, which is fun, but takes time. Thanks to also, as I said, to Frontier for giving us a free version of the original game on the BBC. So that's just a nice little touch. Max Thomason says, I'm curious to how many MB those images are. Do you mean megabytes? Because they're not anywhere near megabytes. Okay, they're not megabytes. I can show you, I think. Let me find out. Well, the Commodore 64. There is the Elite screen. There is the snapshot. Now the snapshot itself is 170K, but that's probably due to the emulator. So the maximum that these computers could handle is actually about 30 to 48K, depending on the equivalent. Notice when I boot up the Commodore. If I just reboot it, there we go, reboot this computer, you'll notice it starts up with 64K RAM system, 38,911 bytes free. That's all it's got. So that's it. The Spectrum is very similar. Spectrum doesn't tell you much about its configuration. It literally just says, yeah, I'm ready. But you have about 32K available on the Spectrum, and the BBC is even less than that. If we go for the one that we should really be using, BBC Model B, it's basically, there it is. So the BBC Model B, 32K, ready to go. So we're not talking megabytes, we're talking kilobytes on these computers. That's how old they are. But you could access a bit more machine code, that's exactly right. So it's not very much. So Alien, I know you're wrapping up, but what about the modern version of Elite from Frontier Zone? So this is the one we were using, Alien. That's what we got. So Beeb M is the one that is from the Frontier store. This one up here is the one from the Frontier store that we were running. So the BBC Model Plus, and if we load the disk image, that is the one from the Frontier store that we were running. So yeah, yeah, these games are 32 kilobyte games. We're not even talking megabyte. The 8-bit computers don't know what a megabyte is. Okay, they can't talk about megabytes. They can only talk about kilobytes. The maximum amount of memory that these computers could address in total was 64,000 bytes. Well, to be totally accurate, 64,384 bytes. Okay, that was the maximum amount of memory on an 8-bit computer. That's, yeah, the only way you can access more was to page it in and out of another store. So you could only get at 64K memory in one go. That was it. So all of these games, with all of their complexity, all of their sound effects, all of their graphics, all of their text, all of their gameplay, all of their AI, everything, 64K. All right. So that's why these games are genius, because the limitations of those computers was outrageously bad. There we go. So the top of the memory, there we are, 65535. 65,536 bytes of memory is a maximum amount. Okay, and that has to include everything. So that's the operating system, the very primitive drivers as they were in the day. You generally access the hardware directly. The screen display and the user part of the memory where you could actually store a program. So everything, the entire operation of the computer, 65,536 bytes. Okay, not even close to a megabyte, not even a tenth of a megabyte. Everything. So we can laugh at them now. I mean, they are historical relics, but back in the day, this was state-of-the-art stuff, and it's still impressive today that you can make a space game of, you know, thousands and thousands of planets, you know, dozens of different ships, AI, special effects, laser fights, trading, missions in such a small space. That's the genius of these games. So we'll leave it there because they are all fantastic. So thank you very much to the BBC version. Thank you very much for the Spectrum version, and also a worthy contender, I feel, in the Commodore 64 version as well. So lovely to play that. That was my first experience of playing on the Commodore 64. I think it acquitted itself very well. So fantastic. Really enjoyed that. So all good stuff. Anyway, so a couple of weeks off for me for my retro stream, but we will be back, and I'll have a think about what we're going to do next. So it will be 8 or 16-bit. I can guarantee that. Maybe occasionally 32-bit, but we'll try and stick with the old stuff. Yeah, we'll be doing more retro gaming on the Saturday. So thank you very much for your company. I hope you appreciated a little bit of a trip down memory lane for the different versions of Elite on the 8-bit platforms. Have a fantastic rest of the weekend. Back on Monday for my creative stream. Back on Thursday for the last, quite sad actually, the last of my lore tour and the Formidine Rift expedition, where me and the new Rifters, as we're calling ourselves, have finally reached the Zoara megaship deep in the Formidine Rift, and we're going to unlock the last few secrets there. And that marks the end of the lore tour as well. So time for me to have a holiday for a couple of weeks, which is going to be nice. But I will be back after that for more shenanigans in Elite and Elite Dangerous and 8-bit stuff. So yeah, the streams will continue, which is good fun. So you guys take good care of yourselves. Thank you very much for your company. See you on a new stream. Yeah, we'll be back. But for now, right on, Commanders. See you soon.